All right, guys, Mark Kweppet here, your favorite porn recovery coach. And today I want to teach you about the rules for a successful porn reboot. If you've been struggling with a porn problem and have searched anything online, then there's no doubt that you've come across this idea of a porn reboot. The idea is that if you can just go for a period of time without porn, then your brain will heal from the addiction, your focus and confidence will skyrocket, and you'll be able to go on living without it. The problem is that a lot of guys never take the time to really clarify the parameters of this process and end up quickly falling off course. So what I'm going to be doing here today is laying out the best ways to set up and approach your porn reboot for maximum success. I've been helping guys get clean from porn for well over a decade now, and what I'm going to share with you is absolutely essential information, especially if you want to avoid grinding your gears for months or even years trying to get free. So this video is going to cover two big topics, all right? The parameters of your reboot, i.e. what you need to avoid and for how long. And then I'm going to talk about how you should track, understand, and interact with your porn-free streak. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. We're going to start with the reboot parameters, and there are a few variables that you need to get dialed in. The first is usage of porn, masturbation, and real sex. And then there's also the whole duration of the process, okay? So we're gonna walk through these one by one, starting with porn, okay? So with porn, obviously if you're doing a porn reboot, don't use porn. But then there's kind of this question of, well, what is porn exactly? Where is that line, okay? And the part to clarify is that not using porn also includes not viewing any overtly sexual media where the sexual titillation itself is the main draw of the activity. Okay, so for example, all right, you don't want to be watching some dumb show that you're only watching because there's a hot, scantily clad woman in it. Okay, you want to heal the sexual pathways in your brain. So anytime you intentionally use sexual media for the sole purpose of getting sexual excitement, you are engaging those same neural pathways that are shared with porn. All right, so scrolling hotties on Instagram or whatever site, okay, even if it's not explicitly porn, this kind of stuff should absolutely be avoided. Now, in our hypersexualized society, you can't always completely avoid this stuff unless you want to go like live in a cave, right? Like say you're watching a UFC event, they've got ring girls, or, you know, even NFL football, you got cheerleaders there, you know, and these things, they're very sexual in nature, but it doesn't mean you need to hide from all of that kind of stuff, all right? If you're there to watch the fight, watch the fight. If you want to watch the football game, watch the football game. And when that kind of stuff comes on, just don't let yourself get sucked into it and just get your brain back on whatever it is you're doing. Watch the show, okay? Like do the thing. And this also extends into real life activities. You want to avoid ogling, for lack of a better term. So for example, I know some guys, they would specifically go to the gym at a certain time of day, even if it wasn't convenient for them, because they knew that's when all the hot girls were at the gym and they got to stare at them, okay? Or, you know, there's a guy who would drive really far to go work at this certain cafe because he knew there were cute college girls there that he could creep on, okay? You want to avoid that kind of stuff because that's where we're just prioritizing the sexual stimulation. And we're not avoiding this because sexual beauty is bad or that you should hide from attractive women. It's because you're trying to reboot your brain, right? Avoiding this stimulation makes the process easier by reducing cravings, and it also increases the healing speed because your brain's getting a more significant reset. Now, don't be obsessive about this stuff, okay? Especially the more minute details and gray areas, all right? Just focus on keeping your head and heart on board with the spirit of the plan, which is to reboot your brain. Next, let's talk about masturbation, okay? Some guys, they try to keep masturbating while still using porn. And I get that idea, you know, guys think, oh, well, I can't live without masturbation, but porn is clearly bad. So I'm just gonna cut the porn, keep jerking off. Right? And honestly, I've never seen a guy really reach his goals that way, at least not sustainably. Okay, like a while ago, there was this talk about healthy masturbation where a guy just focuses on the pure physical feeling of, you know, I guess stroking himself, and that's it. Like he doesn't fantasize, he doesn't look at anything or whatever. He just keeps it pure, okay? The problem with this is that if you're continuing to masturbate like that, it gets really boring really quick, okay? And once it gets boring, what do? You start to fantasize. And if we're being honest, that's just mental porn, okay? Which is Again, reigniting those pathways. And once you start masturbating with mental porn, it almost ends up always on this slippery slope back to the real deal. Because that's just the way sexual conditioning works. If you've had a porn problem in the past, then the reality is that it's way easier to just quit masturbating along with quitting porn. It's easier to do that than it is to try and keep masturbation alone without porn, okay? And this is especially true if you follow a religious or moral code where masturbation is considered wrong to begin with. To zoom this out a little bit, like at the end of the day, do you really want to be a guy who yanks his wiener to trick his brain into thinking he's having sex? Okay? If you don't, then get on board with quitting this habit along with porn. Otherwise, every time you masturbate, you're going to be feeding a schism in your identity where you're not being the most authentic and true version of yourself. Personally, as a guy who used to masturbate daily and now hasn't for over 12 years, I can tell you I don't miss it one little bit, and I am so much better off without it. Your body will eventually totally adapt, and you can be 100% fine without it. Now, it might be hard to believe that if you've been masturbating since a young age, but man, it's the truth, okay? I absolutely promise you, you just gotta let your body adapt. Next thing we gotta look at is sex with a partner. Now, sex, especially in marriage, is an incredibly good thing, like a super good thing. However, if you really want to quit porn, then you're going to want to abstain from sex for at least a period. Now, some guys might fight against this. They might be saying that, oh, well, you want to just quit porn and just focus on real sex. You want to rewire your brain back to the real thing. But there's a few reasons why I still always recommend a period of total abstinence. The first one is that it actually reduces your overall cravings for porn. You see, after having sex, most guys experience what's been dubbed the chaser effect, where the days following sex, you experience much higher cravings for porn. And I believe the reason for this is because having sex reignites those sexual pathways in your brain. It's like your brain gets a taste of its drug, and then it just wants more and more. And by giving your system a full reset, it leads to less overall cravings. Now, the second reason for avoiding sex is that it teaches you to hold your sex drive. Many guys think that they are so hooked on porn because their sex drive is just so high. The reality is that porn addiction is primarily driven by just chemical addiction in the brain and using it as an emotional regulator. But just raw sexual drive is still for sure a component, especially when you're young and maybe you first got into it. But if you go any significant period without sexual stimulation, something really important happens. It forces you to actually learn how to be present with your sexual charge. It teaches you that your sexual charge is actually good. It's power. It's something that warms you and enlivens you. It's not something that you need to just get out of your system like it's some kind of poison. And this is an experience that most guys never actually have. They start masturbating once they hit puberty and they never learn how to hold their masculine power. Learning how to do this is just insanely useful, just from a productivity standpoint, a mindset standpoint, and also just dealing with marriage, because a lot of times in marriage, sometimes the sex is frequent, sometimes it's just non-existent for health reasons, psychological reasons, maybe there's pregnancy or whatever. There's all kinds of reasons why you might need to go a period without having sex, even if you're married. And being able to be okay with that is huge. And the final reason to avoid sex during a reboot is a deeper one. And that is, it prevents you from bringing someone else into your dysfunction. Because when a guy is hooked on porn and he has sex, typically has trouble really loving his partner in the act and more uses them almost as if they were like a living sex doll. So when you avoid sex, it puts you in a position where you can actually rebuild the deeper underlying connections and intimacy that a healthy sex life is ultimately built upon. Okay, like cuddle, talk, connect with your partner, fall back in love with them, but save the sex until your brain has been rebooted. And then when you go back to sex, it's almost always a million times better. So to recap, if you really want to reboot your brain from porn for good, you need a period of total abstinence so that your brain can heal. This is typically called a hard mode reboot, which is actually kind of ironic because it's actually the easiest way to reboot your brain. When you start mixing in other stuff, the temptations, the cravings, the chance of relapse, they skyrocket. All right. So just go the path of total abstinence. Now, this brings us to the next question. How long should you follow these rules? Well, I'd say that being porn and masturbation free is a permanent lifestyle, but what about sex? Okay. The easiest and most universal answer is 90 days. For most guys, going 90 days of total abstinence is the sweet spot. So you might be wondering, what happens in 90 days? Why is this 90-day mark so special? Well, typically, this is where you've rewired your brain enough so that the compulsion for porn has really been broken. Yeah, you could obviously always go back to porn, but prior to 90 days, a slip can happen purely on autopilot. Post 90 days, at least typically, your brain has rewired enough to build up new pathways and construct somewhat of a barrier toward the old behavior. Typically, this means that you will no longer have to worry about just acting out with porn in an unconscious autopilot haze. Of course, you can always choose to relapse, but that's the key. When you're like really addicted, it feels like you can relapse without choosing. It just kind of happens. So getting to this 90-day period is very powerful because at that point, you can stop putting so much energy into staying clean and start reinvesting this energy into other areas of your life. Even better, your brain will be much healthier and your heart more aligned, so anything you tackle next will be way easier. If you can quit porn, you can do just about anything. So while 90 days is the standard rebooting goal, there's a few details about the duration of your reboot that are worth noting here, okay? And the first one is about if you're really a heavy porn user, meaning you regularly do big binges or you use multiple times a day, or you've got a really significant sexual dysfunction, okay? In these instances, you might need to go 4 to 6 months instead of 3 to see the full effects. And I've heard of some guys needing even longer for some more severe sexual dysfunction to clear up. If you're coming from extreme addiction, that might make sense. But for a lot of guys, once it goes beyond 6 months and you're still having problems, you might be starting to deal with mindset or psychological issues rather than purely just like, chemical addiction kind of stuff. Another wrinkle to consider on the duration is whether you're married and have been trying a hard mode reboot already for an extended period of time. Like, for example, okay, I've had guys come to me who have been trying and failing to do a hard mode reboot for months or even years sometimes. And they've been forcing this extended abstinence on their spouse as well. And frankly, I just don't think this is a really good idea. Like, it's not healthy for a marriage to go extended periods of time without sex. So if your spouse is on board, then yeah, you can go the full 90 days. Like, that's still great. But if they aren't, or you've been, forcing abstinence on them, then maybe you shorten it, okay? Like 1 month could be fine. All right. As long as you yourself have experienced a period of abstinence, it's good enough. Okay, on to the next thing here. Now that we've defined our hard mode reboot as a 90-day period, total abstinence, let's talk about how we approach this streak itself. All right. In a lot of addiction circles, there's this idea of only taking things just 1 day at a time. Like, don't worry about going 90 days. Okay. Just focus on right now. And I think that this is a useful mental technique to use when you're in the middle of a big craving, okay? Like telling yourself you only need to go till the end of the day or even go till the end of 5 minutes, okay? That's a lot easier to mentally handle when your brain is craving and freaking out asking for porn than thinking about, I got to go 90 more days like this or whatever, okay? So like as a mental technique, the 1 day at a time thing or the 1 minute at a time thing, that's okay. But the nuance here is that I believe that living a porn-free life is something that you have to decide you want from the very beginning. It's an adjustment that you really need to wrap your mindset around and actually digest, okay? And it takes time to do this. It takes time to adopt and integrate a mentality of living truly clean from this stuff. And because of that, you want to be practicing that mentality from a high level from day one. So don't aim to just decrease porn usage. Aim to completely quit it. Every time, every streak, go for the win, okay? Because if you aim to just use less, you've already decided it's okay to use porn on some level. Even if this reduction in frequency mentality can cut down on how much you use, it never actually leads to you really quitting. Guys who I've seen use this approach, yeah, they'll bring it down for a little bit, but then they just go right back up eventually, okay? And why is this? Well, I believe it's because you get good at what you practice. So if you're practicing the mentality of it's okay to use a little bit, well, that's a rationalization that sits in your brain and it's going to keep coming up and you're going to keep saying, well, it's okay to use a little bit. And then you're going to keep using. All right. So instead, I want you to decide to embrace the process of saying goodbye to this issue for good. All right. Bumps may come, all right? Accept the journey, but don't lower yourself to anything less than a fully authentic pursuit of what you want most, which is to be completely clean. And this brings us to our next point, all right? Tracking your streak. I firmly believe in the power of tracking your streak. However, many guys screw this up. So here are my best practices, all right? If you use porn or masturbate, you restart your streak because you basically reset your neurological healing. All right. And an analogy I use is to view your porn addiction like a big kind of like gash in your arm that was caused by a knife or something like that. Okay. And that gash, it needs to heal. And in this scenario, there are like 3 levels of re-injuring yourself that need to be understood differently. First, you've got slips. Okay. So if you watch porn for a minute in an autopilot haze, but then shut it down before you progress any further, that's a slip. Like you wake up, you snap out and be like, oh crap, I don't want to be doing this. And you put it away. Right. Just a slip. Okay. If you scroll some bikini pictures for a minute or two and then you shut it down. Okay. Again, that's a slip. Okay. If you play with yourself for a minute in a morning haze, okay, but then stop, that's a slip. Okay. And for a slip, that doesn't mean you need to completely reset your streak. Because for a typical porn addict, things like this would not be a relapse, but they're not good. It's like picking the scab on the wound, okay? It can slow the healing and it can make it itch more, which means more cravings, and it opens you up to getting infected, which would be falling down the slippery slope where you eventually relapse, okay? So these kind of slips, they're not good. Don't allow them, but if they happen, okay, it doesn't mean you need to reset your streak. There is a caveat to this, okay? Like if you're aiming for a higher level of sexual self-mastery, then you might reset your streak with these kinds of things. But I'd get totally clear from porn and masturbation first before you start getting that strict with yourself. For example, like I've had clients who got clean from porn and masturbation for 6 months plus, but then they really wanted to like eliminate lust altogether from their lives. For these guys, they might reset their streak on something that you would just consider a slip, okay? And that's great if you're on that level, but holding yourself to these standards when you're still dealing with a porn problem is counterproductive, all right? Sexual fantasy, taking second looks at attractive women, maybe doing a risky click every once in a while, completely eliminating these things typically takes more than 90 days, okay? And it's not worth beating yourself up and constantly like viewing yourself starting at ground zero. Further, getting all worked out about smaller slips just makes it more likely for you to just say, I've already screwed up. I might as well go all the way now and use porn. Now, of course, that makes no rational sense, but I can't tell you the number of guys I've seen it happen with. It's some kind of perfectionism thing where it's like, if I'm not perfect, I might as well become the complete opposite of what I want. Which, yeah, it's silly, but it's, the addicted brain does silly things. So those are the guidelines on slips. But after slips, you have the next level of re-injuring yourself, which would be single instance relapses. This is when you intentionally use porn or masturbate once, okay? In this scenario, instead of just picking the scab, okay, that what a slip would be, it's like you've ripped the scab off. So when you relapse with porn or masturbation, you reset your streak, okay? You be honest about it. It's painful to do, but you got to be real. And this undoes a lot of the healing that has occurred, but it doesn't necessarily undo all of it, especially if you're coming from a place where you've used porn a lot. Like if you're coming from a high frequency of porn use, like, daily or multiple times a week, you go a couple of weeks and you relapse once, okay? You still have some healing that has occurred, right? Like you can think of it as a scab, like, how a scab, like it'll shrink over time. Okay, well, the shrinkage has still occurred. You might have ripped the scab off, but the actual length of the wound has gotten smaller. That still stays even if you rip the scab off, right? So that's kind of what can happen here. And this is in contrast to binging. And porn binges are what we want to absolutely avoid at all costs. By binging, I'm referring to long edging sessions or multiple uses of porn in a short period. This is like more than just tearing the scab off. This is like taking the knife back out and completely recreating the wound. So if you relapse once, the big thing you want to avoid thinking is, I've already lost my streak. I might as well go on a bender before I get back on the horse. If you do this, you are absolutely shooting yourself in the foot. Okay? Because the reality is that many guys end up going on a series of smaller streaks before they finally break free for good. Again, we don't aim for these smaller streaks, but if they are interrupted by only single instance relapses, you can accumulate enough healing and internal fortitude that you'll be able to make the shift to quitting permanently. But if these smaller streaks are interrupted by binges, well, you're really setting yourself up for a much, much harder time. Luckily, if you follow the additional things I'll be covering in future lessons, avoiding binges should be relatively easy. Now, say you do have a slip or a relapse. What should you do? Well, the most powerful thing you can do is turn it into a learning experience that you can then use to actually recondition your mind to have that not happen again. Basically, it's like a failing forward process where you don't just get stronger from success, even your missteps lead toward progress. And the simplest way to do this is to perform what I call a retroactive journal entry using my Metascript method technique. This kind of journal entry only takes a few minutes, but it can be absolutely game-changing. If you want to learn how to do this and even learn how to create journal entries that stop relapses before they even start, then make sure you sign up over at markquepit.com, where a free membership will unlock the full guide on this technique. Honestly, the Metascript method is probably the single most powerful technique for quitting porn that I am aware of. But with that being said, now I want to talk about the final topic I want to cover here, and that is your mindset toward your streak. Some guys become way too obsessed with their day count. The absolute worst thing you can do is use this number of your streak to define how you feel about yourself. Some guys associate their very self-worth with their number of days clean. It's like, oh, they got a big streak going. They feel like the man. As soon as they relapse, they're like, oh, I'm a piece of crap. Oh, I suck. They start beating themselves up, okay? This is a fundamentally undignified perspective that usually just leads to binging and streak anxiety, where you're constantly worried about undoing your progress. And that anxiety, well, guess what? That just adds more tension to the system and makes a relapse more likely. Counting your streak is just a tool. It is designed to motivate you and hold you accountable. It is not a number that defines your goodness or worth as a man. Guys who like to promote non-tracking approaches to quitting porn typically do this because they don't know how to separate their worth from this number. And this is something that we are going to talk about a lot in future videos. But if you can track your streak in a dignified manner, okay, it's an incredible asset because what gets measured gets improved. So if you want the best improvement, track your streak as a tool, not as a definition of you. Now, a very important note on this tracking stuff. While we aim for consecutive days clean, we must still celebrate wins in a decrease in frequency of porn use. So if a guy goes from using porn daily to using it once a week, then yeah, he's not going to be having impressively long streaks. However, he's still reduced his overall porn usage by a whopping 85%, which is an absolutely massive win, okay? Like, I've seen guys in this exact situation of going from using every day to once a week, beating themselves up and feeling like a failure. Is an 85% improvement a failure? No, it's the sign of incredible progress. Yeah, you're not to 100 yet. We're aiming for 100, but let's celebrate the 85, okay? If you fail to let yourself feel this progress, you're going to get discouraged and your efforts will falter. Many times just acknowledging the progress with frequency is the key to staying the course and ultimately getting those big long streaks and eventually getting that one that just goes off into infinity as it becomes your permanent lifestyle. So hopefully now you understand the basic rules of rebooting your brain from porn. But the big question is, how are you going to get yourself to actually pull this off, right? Like this isn't easy stuff. Well, that's exactly what we're going to be covering in future lessons. For right now, though, I want you to click on the link in the description to view this on markquepit.com and sign up for a free membership. This will allow you to see the exercises for this video. It'll let you see the rest of the videos in this program, get the journaling guide, and be alerted whenever a new lesson is released. So go over to markquepit.com and do that right now. I hope you found this useful, and I look forward to seeing you guys in the next one. Booyah.